Hey everyone, I wanted to talk a little bit about something new for me. Now, you guys are probably watching my channel because you really enjoy scary stories. And you guys know that I love making these videos. I have a lot of cool video ideas that I don't think will always fit here on the channel. So I was pretty excited when I heard about the Amino app's new feature of being able to post stories over there. I have actually partnered with Amino to join in on this and post some of my own stories. I'm going to be posting short scary stories over there just like this that you won't be able to see here on the channel. Be sure to click the link in the description or the pinned comment or search for Amino apps to download Amino. You can find my stories by searching Southern Cannibal. And make sure to follow me and click the bell to know when I'm posting my new videos. Just like YouTube, every time you watch my videos you'll be supporting me. So if you enjoy my videos, this is another simple free way to keep me creating the content that you all enjoy. All of that being said, let's begin on today's video. I was 11 years old at the time and living in a nice suburb area. We had recently moved into this house that my parents had built, and it was our very first home versus rented house in a sketchy area. It was a very nice neighborhood. The whole family made friends quickly with lots of the neighbors, but especially the ones 3 doors down. They had a daughter around my age. I'm male, by the way. They also had a daughter 5 years younger, which was the same age as my sister. Our parents got along pretty well, and we began hanging out quite a bit for barbecues at their house or parties at our house. Friendships were formed pretty quickly and seemed to be very strong. After about a year or so, I started to realize that things weren't what they seemed. I remember seeing police cars at their house a few times in the evenings, and whenever I would ask my parents what was going on, it was always nothing, just checking in on them type answers. I was no genius, but at 11 years old, I knew that didn't add up. Why didn't the cops just come and check up on us? One day I'm at their house playing and hanging out, and their daughter goes across the street to get another mutual friend, which left myself and the father alone in the house. Now, this was really no big deal as it has happened before, but then he approached me and just seemed off. I still don't know what made me feel this way, but I was very uncomfortable and started thinking about leaving. About 5 minutes later, he tells me he has something cool that he wants to show me. I don't remember what it was, but I think it was something about baseball cards, which I was very fond of at the time. I very excitedly started following him. He then pulled the attic ladder down and asked me to follow him, which I did without hesitation at first. Then something happened, and I still can't process what it was. He was ahead of me on the ladder, but when he looked back to help me into the attic, there was something off. Something about his eyes, his face, his grin. It wasn't right. It looked evil. I can still see it clear as day, and can't recognize exactly what it was that set my alarms off. Whatever it was plenty, because I jumped off the ladder and ran out the door right away. I sprinted all the way home and was choking back tears when I busted through my front door. My mom was there when I came through, and she could see I was totally out of sorts and immediately started calming me down. As I came to my senses, I explained what happened. My mom was concerned with how scared I was, but mostly brushed it off to me being scared, young, and silly. I kid you not, the same exact night I was woken up at around 3 a.m. It was my mom sitting on my bed, and as I awoke, she just held me like a baby. I remember how she smelled and how tightly she held me, and I remember her tears hitting my cheek. Eventually, I saw out the window to the neighbor's house surrounded by police and fire trucks. Apparently, the neighbor dad had killed himself and his daughter in the attic after a standoff with the police. There isn't a doubt in my mind nor my mother's that that could have been me if I had went into the attic. I still get chills thinking about it. So, neighbor man, even in the afterlife, please stay away from me. So, around 10 to 12 years ago, I lived in a little 2-bedroom house on a long road. It is a terraced house on a long strip of other terraced houses. Back in the day, all of the attics were joints, and you could literally travel through them. Years later, they realized it was a bad idea. Fire spreading, burglars, etc. So all the attics were bricked up so each house was secure. One night, I was soaking in the bath when I heard a noise above me. Thinking it may be an animal or something, I just ignored it. This went on for a few weeks, only it was getting to the point where I would only hear the noise when I was in the bath or shower, or getting changed. I got one of my friends to check the attic, and he told me he didn't see anything, which just confirmed my animal story. Not much happened after that for about a month or two, when one night I was alone. I was getting ready to take a shower as I was heading out with friends. I heard the same noise above when all of a sudden the dog started going crazy, barking and looking directly above me. Clearly I was freaked out and decided to get ready at a friend's house. The very next day I was outside my house when the neighbor shouted at me. Now, my neighbor is pretty creepy. He's small and smelly and strange looking with a hint of crazy in his eyes. He asked if I was okay. Being polite, trying to show him he doesn't really bother me, I then said yes and went about my business. Just as I got to my door, he then asked if I got to my friends okay. Now, at first, without thinking, I then said yes and thank you. I also smiled and waved goodbye. When I got inside my house, I realized that he wouldn't know I was at a friend's house unless he heard me on the phone, and as I was so creeped out the night previously, I was practically whispering to my friend. Anyway, I rang my family members. I told my dad and they all came around. They turned the lights on in the bathroom but kept all of the other lights off. They opened the attic door and you could see two lights shining through the top of the attic, two tiny little holes. My bathroom ceiling was quite dark, so I never really noticed them before. My dad went inside and he was gone a while, but when he returned he was blazing angry. He ignored everyone and walked straight outside to the neighbor's house. We then heard him shouting for the neighbor to open the door, but he wasn't home. I asked my cousin to go up to check it out. When he came back down, he told me that the wall separating the attics had been knocked through. Most of the brickwork was on my side, so it was knocked through from the other side. We called the police, but they told us there was no proof that he had done anything. The neighbor told the police that he never even used the attic, and the previous tenants might be the ones to blame for this. Clearly, he was to blame. He was a dirty old pervert. I don't think I've ever been so creeped out knowing that dirty pervert had been watching me for all of that time. I never stayed in that house again. I know that typically people share personal encounters here, but I knew after finding this subreddit that I needed to share this. This happened to my wife's aunt named Sarah. I apologize that I can't relay some of her emotions, and at times have to skimp on a few details, as it is a secondhand account as told by my wife. This was about 10 or 15 years ago, and Sarah had recently been divorced. Her husband moved out, and Sarah continued living in the house by herself for some time after that. The house was in a typical neighborhood and wasn't secluded or off by itself or anything like that. As Sarah became used to living alone again, she felt like she kept hearing things in her attic and began to wonder what was making the noises that she was hearing. She called the police and had them come sweep up her attic looking for traces of anyone living up there. But they never found anything and told her she was probably just hearing a raccoon or a squirrel or some other kind of small animal. In the days after the cops came to her house, she felt like the noises were getting louder and there was no way it was a small animal. She called the police yet again a week later, and the same thing happened. They didn't find anything yet again. A few days later, after the second call to the police, Sarah came home from work earlier than usual. Fortunately for her, she had started dating during that time, and her boyfriend was with her when she came home that day. As she got out of her car in her garage, she noticed something out of place and scary as crap at the door. It was a pair of muddy men's boots. I'd really like to think that if she'd been home alone, she'd have enough sense not to enter her house at that point, but luckily, her boyfriend was with her. They cautiously entered the house and discovered upon opening the door A man standing naked in the laundry room, doing his laundry. Sarah went to call the police, but the phone wasn't working and she ended up going next door to use the phone. Now, I'm a bit fuzzy on the details here, but they managed to keep him in place in time for the police to arrive, and they took him away. Turns out that this guy had access to her house somehow, and he indeed had been spending time in the attic. The cops found a small hole in the attic above her bedroom where he had been watching her, and on that very day, he'd cut the phone line and then put a knife under her pillow. God only knows what would have happened if she had come home by herself, but thankfully that didn't happen. I don't really know any more details about the guy other than the fact that the cops took him away and he presumably spent some time in jail. I just really pray and hope that he doesn't prey on any other women. This took place around 15 years ago when I was 16 years old and working at a fast food joint with a few of my friends. A weird guy in his late 30s named James worked with us, and he was very friendly with everybody, but even more so with the teenage girls. My friends called him a creep, but I thought he was just socially awkward, so I always went out of my way to talk to him and be nice. Big mistake. James started making me CDs of bands that I liked, would buy me movies, stuffed animals, and started even buying me clothes. All these things that he swore he got super cheap or for free. None of these things I asked for, and I started refusing them after a few weeks when I noticed how skimpy the clothes were. He would give me very low-cut shirts or miniskirts, and the last thing he ever gave me was a lacy pink thong, which I'm getting into now. The oldest girl I was friends with, who was 18 years old, lived with our store manager as a roommate in an apartment complex. The manager bought her booze to have a graduation party, and that weekend all of the younger girls came to spend the night. After a few hours, I was drunk for the first time in my life when James comes through the door. Turns out he lived directly across the hall from them. Booze make me overly affectionate, so I gave him a big hug. Again, big mistake. He tells me that he has something he wants to show me on his computer, and me being intoxicated, I agree to go see it. I walk across the hall to see his disgusting apartment and stand behind him while he gets onto his computer. He pulls out a folder full of what I know to be lolly porn, shows me a picture of the same lolly, and then turns to me and says,
"You look just like her, and she's my favorite."
In the picture, the girl is only wearing a lacy pink thong. Alarm bells started going off in my head, and I say something about going back to the party when he asks me to wait because he has something for me. He opens the bottom desk drawer and pulls out a lacy pink thong just like the one in the picture and tries to give it to me. I mumble that I hate thongs and I turn to leave, but he's up and has my shoulder before I can get to the door. Now, I'm around 115 pounds, 5 feet tall, and drunk. He towers over me, so I'm feeling pretty panicked at this point.
"I want you to wear these for me, just for the night, and if you don't like them, you can just give them back."
He pulls me in closer to him with his free arm holding the panties in front of my face, and I am so thankful that he didn't lock the door to his apartment, because right at that moment the store manager came busting in. While I absolutely hated her guts at work, at that moment I was so thrilled to see her that tears started rolling down my face. She had asked the other kids where I was and immediately rushed over when they told her I went with James. She looked at the situation for a brief second before shouting at him to let go of me, grabbing my hand and pulling me back across the hallway. I'm pretty sure she ended up firing James, because I never saw him again after that night. I worked at a sandwich chain / bakery during college in a pretty dark time in my life. My coworker was probably 15 to 20 years older than me, and I sorta knew him. He invited me to an outside party at a place that I'd been to before with people that I knew in the middle of the afternoon / evening. I told him I could only stay for a few hours, but the girl that I was dating and staying with, in between leases before school started up again, was also having a party, so I was going over there later. Everything was fine and there were food, drinks, and pool volleyball in the sun. The dude wasn't really being particularly flirty or anything, just acting like he usually would. After a drink or so, he started asking me if I thought his girlfriend was hot, and slapping her butt and whatnot. He knew I was into women, and for some reason was trying to prompt something I didn't realize. I had to leave shortly after. I drove to the next party and sat down on the couch, and that's when it hit me. Thank God it was not a second sooner. It's like my entire body was preserving itself. The last thought that I remember having was, I feel really messed up for just 3 light beers, and then I proceeded to wreak havoc for the next 6 to 7 hours. I have no memory of it, but I was talking crap that I didn't mean to people I would never actually insult. I also threw my cat a good distance across the room, and I'm told that I fell down an entire flight of stairs face first and bloodied myself up pretty badly, and I guess I was being overly emotional and acting ridiculous in general, which is how one might act when drugged. I had been staying with the girl for at least 2 weeks, and we had been dating for at least 2 months. She had drank with me before, and she should have known that something was severely wrong. Instead, she just assumed I was being insane, and at 3 a.m. drove me in the car to the street that I used to live on next to the apartment I had just moved out of, and then took my keys and ran. She then called the cops on me. Several cars ended up pulling up exactly where I became conscious of my actions, and I was trying to figure out where I was and how I had gotten into that situation. The cops start by yelling at me, asking me what I'm doing and who hit me. I was totally confused. I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't know about my escapade with the stairs yet, so I didn't even know I was bloody, and that question really caught me off guard. They continued to bombard me with more questions that I couldn't answer, and thank the Lord again I had a friend that lived across the street from the apartment that I only really knew because I smoked with them. I called and he answered the phone and came to my rescue right away. The cops let me flee to his house and berated him about where I was sleeping and what he was doing. All the while, ever since I left that party, texts were coming in repeatedly from that coworker asking to meet up, asking about screwing him and his girl, and a couple of other inappropriate remarks. I know it was him who slipped me something. He was the only one near me at that party, and the only one who attempted anything like he did that whole night. The very next day, the girl I was staying with was going to throw all of my stuff on the curb and throw me out because she thought I was crazy. But when she described to me what happened, she could tell I had no memory of any of it at all, and I really was drugged. The only thing I ever really did about it was talk to my manager so I could try to get shifts with him not on them. Who knows what would have happened if it hit me at the wrong moment while I was at his party. I don't even want to think about it. This was my first job while studying psychology at a university, so literally every living moment I was not at university, I was at work. I worked as an AV technician in a bank, and at this point I had been there for at least 2.5 years. We had a position to fill within the team, and we interviewed a man named Sam. He came across so well in the interview, polite, kind, intelligent, and just everything that we wanted in a new employee. He had mentioned during his interview that he needed 3 days off within the next 2 weeks, as he had a funeral for his partner who had just recently passed away. We were completely understanding he was hired and then started a week later, which I greeted with pleasure as he was such a character to be around. His outgoing personality and the way he came across instantly became a telltale sign that he was homosexual, and sure enough, a few days after we knew him, he came out to us. None of us had a problem. It brought some bubbliness to the office that we hadn't had in quite a while, and it instantly confirmed the use of the word partner rather than wife. A couple of us in the office thought it was kinda weird that he trusted us enough so quickly to tell us something so personal, but oh well. I felt like we all got along like a house on fire. We were always constantly chatting while training. There was no signs to suggest he didn't like me. That is, until I was pulled into the office by my account manager and assistant account manager, who then proceeded to tell me that he had made a formal complaint about me. They proceed to explain that he thinks I am ignorant towards him, and that as his trainee supervisor I should be more than willing to assist him in his training with questions or any issues that he may have. It was really silly things like not answering his calls when he needed help in a room, etc. When actually in reality, the only reason I never answered was because I was dealing with other users in other rooms, and I am simply one person with one set of hands. They basically just told me to try to make peace with him and move on. So here we are a week into the new job, and the new guy hates me. This week was the week of his partner's funeral. He was meant to be in on Monday and Friday. We had already agreed that the Friday he would be in on an early shift in the main building, as I, the early shift technician, needed to go in the other building to deal with a VIP client. 30 minutes into the early shift, I get a call from the reception of the main building saying he's not turned up. I'm halfway across the city with no hope of getting back to the office anytime soon, and I've lost plot on the phone to my team lead, who also didn't know he hadn't turned up. He never came in that day and caused a ton of issues in our main building. He came back in on Monday morning and played the grieving husband card, and that his mental health wasn't good enough to be in the office. I entirely sympathized with him, and I told him that I'm sorry that he lost his partner. I also told him that I know that he needed time to process what happened, but all we wanted was a simple phone call so that we weren't stuck in the crap. Tuesday came and he was nowhere to be seen. He phoned in sick, and that was that. We didn't hear from him again until the Friday morning, which was when he told us he was still sick and wouldn't be back until Monday morning. This is where crap hits the fan. I'm on holiday the following week, which just leaves 2 technicians in the building, one early, one late. He freaking quits and files a formal complaint about the whole department to the freaking managing director of the bank. The list of accusations is freaking phenomenal. Tech 1, stolen equipment which left him suspended indefinitely. Team lead, bias towards me, which meant as a new tech he was piled with all the work. Account manager, bias towards me for being 2 of the only 3 females on the account. And the rest of the team, basic crap like untidy uniform, not willing to help, etc. Me though, it was a whole other story. Untidy uniform, not wearing the correct shoes, constantly on my phone, playing games in the office, watching YouTube videos, ignorant to my work, and not willing to train as the new tech. He even had the balls to call me an alcoholic and say that I was drinking on the job. Not only was he full of crap, he was completely jeopardizing my entire career. And for what, some attention? I wasn't having it. I rallied the troops and we formed a unit front, and literally everyone was on my side. At this point, bear in mind I was a 22-year-old woman looking to find her feet and make a career for myself. This went on for 6 months. 6 whole months that we spent being questioned, being investigated, and collecting evidence together to try and prove what he said was complete BS. I was summoned by HR for questioning, and I was totally crapping bricks. I answered all their questions, and so did my colleagues. They ended up finding out that he was essentially just totally full of crap and looking for some compensation. And to my surprise, we Googled his name, and there he was. This guy was accused of stealing secrets from the police about the protection of royal families on their formal outings, which he sold for over $20,000. To this day, I don't know if anything that he said to me was true. Did his partner really die, or was he just pulling a fast one? I have no freaking clue, but I swear to God, I really hope to never meet him again, because if I ever do, I will punch him right in the throat. When I was in college, I was 17 years old, young and dumb. I was looking for a Christian group to join because it was my comfort zone in a new place. My biology desk mate told me he was a part of a great one and I should join up, so I did. Initially, they asked me to fill out a form that included my name, number, address, religious history, and other general information. There were 2 main leaders, one about 23 years old named Dan, and the other about 35 named Rick. I didn't get creepy vibes from either, but boy was I wrong. After the first couple group meetups to talk about the Bible and learn, I started getting text messages at about 10 p.m. It was from Dan. They started off benign, and just him hoping that I had a good experience so far in the group, and was there anything that he could do to make me more comfortable. Let me just say, I didn't attention seek or flirt in any way to this guy. At 17 years old, I was extremely timid and shy, and I was pretty afraid of any kind of attention. I answered his text generically, like, "Thank you. I really enjoyed the topics that we've covered so far. Have a good night." I was living with my grandma at the time, and I showed her all of the texts. After I said goodnight at about 12 a.m. the same night, He started texting me that I was beautiful. I shrugged it off and I just said thanks. He then proceeded to send me message after message that he wanted to meet up with me. He would drive to me right now and he thought I was the most beautiful person he's ever seen. I continued to brush off his messages until they started getting vulgar and sexual. I don't remember the exact messages, but they had me afraid and very uncomfortable. I turned off my phone and I went to sleep right away. The next morning, he messaged me apologizing for his behavior and wanted to know if we could start fresh. I said yes, like a dumb 17-year-old who didn't want to make waves in the new group that I was a part of now. Immediately, he started up again with the vulgar texts and then started telling me that I looked really beautiful that day when I was on campus, but I was nowhere near him, or so I thought. I had enough, and after showing my grandparents all of the text messages, I decided to report him to the group's other leader and my desk mate. I had deleted all of the texts before I reported him because they made me feel ashamed and embarrassed, but the leader believed me anyways. Apparently, this wasn't his first incident. They forced him to write an apology letter to me, and they ended up banning him from the group. So to that guy who sent me vulgar messages and followed me around campus, please, I hope we never meet again. The story takes place in the fall of 2013. My first semester of college, I had a class with a group project worth of a lot of points. I was partnered with a girl who I'm still friends with today named Emily, and a guy named Nick who was a bit odd. Within the first week of class, he asked me if we could grab lunch after class and discuss our project. I figured it wouldn't hurt to get started early since the project was a quarter of our grade. Once class had ended, I asked Emily if there was anywhere she wanted to go in particular. She was very confused and said Nick never asked her to lunch. Shortly after, Nick approached us and told me that he knew this great restaurant about a block away. Not wanting to be alone, I asked Emily to join, but she had to go to another class. Despite feeling slightly uneasy about the entire situation, I still went to get lunch with him. I figured we could get a rough idea of the project and fill Emily in the next class. Things got kind of weird after that. He didn't talk to me the whole 10-minute walk. He would just kind of smile and stare at me. I quickly became even more uncomfortable now. Once we arrived at this restaurant, he insisted on paying for me. After refusing multiple times, I finally gave in. While we were eating, he stared at me with a really creepy smile, barely breaking eye contact with me. He kept asking me personal questions like where I grew up, where I currently live, how many siblings I have, how old they are, what kind of car I have, etc. I would respond with the least amount of information as possible, trying to get back to the subject of our project. After we finished eating our meal, he got up to go grab dessert. While he was away, I texted my friend to help me out of the situation. He then came back from the dessert buffet and tried to hand feed me a donut. I politely declined because gross, and he got really agitated and kept asking why I didn't want the donut. My friends thankfully called right as that was happening, so I quickly thanked him for lunch and I told him I needed to go help a friend. He told me he was going to stay at the restaurant for a little while longer, and I practically ran out of there. After that day, things got really weird between us. I literally saw Nick everywhere on campus. He would be in the library every time I was there. I would see him in the cafeteria or commons area. I saw him in the halls multiple times throughout the day. I chalked it up to just being a weird coincidence, but still had a weird feeling about him. Things quickly escalated. I started to find him standing outside of my classes while I was in class. I sometimes even found him sitting in my class before it started, before even the teacher was there. I quickly realized that this wasn't just a coincidence, and that there was a good chance he was following me around. The thing is, I attended a community college at the time, so I didn't live on campus for him to easily follow me around like this. I can understand how he could figure out my schedule for Tuesday and Thursday, as we had a class together. The class was at 8:45, and I was still on campus until around 2ish. It's really not that hard to follow me from there. But what I didn't understand was how he knew my schedule for the rest of the week. For the following year, I would always see him around campus, outside of my classes, and occasionally around town as well. I ended up telling my mom his name and a description in case I ever went missing. I started carrying pepper spray and made sure I was aware of my surroundings at all times. After that year, he just vanished one day mid-semester. I never saw him again until about a few weeks ago when I passed him at the hall. We made very awkward eye contact, and I quickly called my mom just in case he tried to approach me to talk to me. He kept walking and I thought everything was okay. That is, until a friend requested me on Facebook last night. Oddly enough, we actually have one mutual friend, my ex-boyfriend. After that though, nothing ever really happened, and let's hope it never does. I'm a male. It was my freshman year of college and around springtime. I enjoyed working out, and after a busy day, it was time to hit the campus gym. Now, to give you a visual of how the campus fitness center is pictured, the main center area has several treadmills, some hamstring sets, and some small televisions. This area also has windows for people outside of the gym area to peer into as well. And to the right of the treadmill area includes the weight and bench press section, and to the left is the entrance to the gym. Anyways, I was doing my nightly routine, and the gym was very empty after I was finished. I decided that it was time to head back to my dorm. Now, this is when things started getting creepy. As I left the gym and was going up the steps, I noticed someone across the campus. He seemed suspicious, and I heard him say from the distance,
"Hey, what's up?"
This was a bearded, rugged-looking male, and he had a hood over his head. I then said what's up back to the man as well. At first, I really didn't think much of it. Maybe he just wanted to be friendly. I began to walk across the grass to my dorm. However, the man then started heading directly to my way, with his eyes completely locked onto mine. I became a bit unnerved and went back into the fitness center rapidly. Now, fortunately for me, there is always a fitness worker near the entrance of the gym who sits at a desk and has people sign in before they work out. At the time, I didn't tell him about what had just happened because I felt like I was possibly being paranoid. What if this guy just wanted to chat with me? However, during the time though, I peered outside the windows of the treadmill area, and I saw shoes pacing back and forth. I started to panic and suspected this was the same guy as before. After this happened, I then decided to stick around and watch some TV in the treadmill area for a good 10 to 15 minutes, just to ensure that the creepy man had given up. It was pretty obvious now that this guy didn't have good intentions. The fitness worker at the desk asked me if everything was okay, when they seemed to notice that I seemed uneasy. I said that someone may be following me, and I'm kinda creeped out. They asked me if I needed them to walk with me back to my dorm, and I said that the guy might be gone now, so I don't think I needed that. However, I was dead wrong. After a good 10 to 15 minutes, it was now time. With a deep breath and butterflies in my stomach, I braced myself and I left the gym very slowly. Stepping outside, it was still humid. What came next though totally creeped me out. As I crept up the gym entrance steps in the dark night, there was a rustling in the bushes. I peeked around the corner very slowly, and there was the strange man leering at me with an odd expression, only a few feet away now. I was totally creeped out. Without a second thought, I ran back into the gym with my heart in my throat, and I told the worker that someone was right outside the gym stalking me. Campus security was then called. However, by the time the security got there, the man was long gone and nowhere to be found. Fortunately for me, they walked me back to my dorm, but not before I had to file a report about what happened. Thinking about this situation still totally unnerves me to this day. I really honestly thought that the guy just wanted to be friendly, but clearly he was up to no good. So yeah, that was definitely my creepiest experience while in college. This story took place in 2012. I moved out on my own for the first time about 2 hours away from my parents in order to go to college. Within the first few weeks of being there, a random guy stopped me on campus and asked me out. I'm a very shy and very introverted person. This had never happened to me before. I said yes. We exchanged phone numbers and we went our separate ways. At the time, I didn't have a cell phone. I only had a Skype number, so I made sure to explain that to him. However, he would still call me all day long while I was at school, and it honestly kind of put me off. Several days later, I decided I needed to run some errands. I walked to Walmart, bought what I needed, and started walking back. It started to rain, and I thought, wow, it's just going to be one of those days, huh? About a mile into my walk home, a car slowed down beside me. Well, it was the dude. He asked if I wanted a ride. I was naive, sore, and tired, and I gave in. I got into the car without even thinking of the possible consequences. He made a big deal about how he wasn't from that part of town, and how lucky I was that he ran into me while he happened to be doing errands there. He drove me to my place, and he asked if I wanted to go to lunch and a movie with him after I put up my stuff. I said sure, why not? He really did seem friendly, and I didn't really think much of it at the time. Once I got back in the car, however, things started to get weird. He asked me if I like seafood, and I said no. I really dislike seafood. He then said,
Well, that doesn't matter. I'm taking you to a nice seafood place. I'm sure they'll have something you can manage to like.
Now, for me, this was red flag number 1. Why ask and then dismiss the response? Why say that my opinion doesn't matter? However, I come from a very narcissistic home, so I thought that maybe I was just reading too much into it. He then started asking me questions about my major, my friends, my hobbies, all the normal stuff. Once we got to the restaurant and began to sit down, he gave me the weirdest look and started asking if anything that I said was true. What?
Are these people you're talking about real? Do they actually exist?
Yeah, they're real people in my class.
I don't believe you. These people don't sound real.
I'm a little taken aback by this. I don't know what's not to believe. They were very normal people. It really weirded me out to be outright accused of making up my friends like that. He went on to accuse me of lying about every little detail about my life. Still, little old southern polite me kept a straight face and got through lunch. It was just really bizarre. We went to the movie and he kept trying to touch me the entire time. I was already so put off from the earlier things that I didn't reciprocate. He got really agitated by this and brought it up once we were out in the car, about how he expected me to be more friendly. Yeah, no, I'm not that kind of girl. He takes me home, and I was glad to finally have that date behind me now. I thought it was over. I refused to return his calls and I began avoiding him at school. Everything is done, right? No, of course not. He started showing up to my apartment daily at 8:30 on the dot to bang on my front door for literally 30 minutes straight. I mean, he wouldn't even take a single minute break. If I answered, he would ask if I wanted to go to lunch later in the day with him. I always told him I was busy, but if I didn't answer, he would just keep knocking. At the time, I didn't have a car, and I literally walked everywhere that I went. I started noticing him driving past me several times when I'd walk to places. He kept offering me rides, to which I'd always say no thank you. He also kept calling me every day. This went on for about 2 months. All in all, I'd say I'm pretty lucky that it never really escalated anything beyond this, and that it finally stopped after the 2 months. However, it was really creepy at the time. When I first started college, my university gave me a list of writing classes that were required for the freshmen. I didn't get my first choice, but I was intrigued when I got placed in a writing class based on human and civil rights. It was a great class and I learned a lot and met Chloe, a girl that I now consider to be my soul sister. My professor didn't seem too odd at first. He kind of had that hippie vibe to him and was very passionate about human and civil rights. He was also head of the political science department at the university. When we first got together, he always boasted about how excited he was to have a class that consisted of all women. I didn't really find it inherently off-putting. I thought it was really cool that he was excited, but my friend and I later analyzed a lot of the weird things that he said, and in a different way. As time went on, I got closer to Chloe. Her and I would get coffee and discuss the reading material frequently, which eventually branched out to us partying and hanging out together as well. She used to joke around that our professor liked us the most because we were the loudmouths in the class, in the sense that we were always the ones talking during the discussions. That, combined with him praising our 100% female class, were not huge red flags for me at the time. The largest event that kind of bothers me now is the trip up to his cabin in the mountains. He had asked us to accompany him as a class to his cabin almost an hour and a half away from the university in the mountains. We thought it was a bit odd, at least some of us. He brought up food and I cooked us a large lunch, and it was actually kind of nice to just have a candid conversation with the girls. And my professor brought his wife, so it didn't seem that weird. However, he remained kind of touchy with us. Nothing major. Just resting his hands on our shoulders while talking to us or trying to get by us. I ended the semester and left that university after finals. I realized that my university didn't have the program that I wanted, so I transferred my credits and started going to another school. My friend was dismayed, but we still hung out and did our work together, and she even took another class with him. She said that she took him on as an academic advisor and worked more closely with him. Again, no immediate red flags from her. That is until one day she texted me asking if I heard the news about him. Since I didn't go to that university anymore, I was amazingly unaware. Our professor had been forced to resign, and it was in the local news as the university was getting ripped to shreds for handling the situation so poorly. Apparently there was a convention or event, and the school's political science department went to it. The president was female, and I guess he had asked her to meet him at his hotel room to discuss the next day's itinerary. When she showed up, he apparently was not fully dressed and invited her in to wait while he finished getting dressed for dinner. She hesitantly agreed, and as he dressed, he apparently told her that he loved her in the same way he loved his wife, and he wanted to be with them both because she was his soulmate. I'm not sure if his wife was in on it or what, but the students immediately reported the incident. Unfortunately, the university offered her a sabbatical, basically asking her to leave the university. Apparently, there was a hearing with university officials, and the professor didn't even deny his behavior. My friend and I got together, and suddenly all of his private meetings with her and I, inviting a group of girls to his cabin in the mountains, seemed very off-putting. I've always found myself to be a very paranoid person, and as I got older, I tried to shed those thinking habits, but now I wish I'd paid more attention and maybe even be able to intervene and say something before this poor girl was essentially booted out of school, only to help protect its reputation. It's truly messed up. I'm not going to lie. I basically went to college to smoke and go to parties. My full intention was to do just enough just to get by while partying as much as I could. Unfortunately for me, I only applied to a few schools and was only accepted to one, a small college in the mountains of New Hampshire. It was very small, around 3,500 total undergrads, and I went not knowing anyone. On the first day, as I was skipping the ice-breaking games, and other students were giving tours of the campus to their families before leaving, I wandered down a small path behind the cafeteria towards a small stream that I had noticed during the drive-in. I lit a joint and was just meandering around when I noticed another dude a little further down the stream that cut a straightish path through the trees. He was also smoking a joint, I assumed by the way he was holding it. I made my way over to see if I had just made my first college friend, and then I introduced myself. His name was Nate, and he seemed pretty cool, and he was smoking some really nice herbs, so I figured I could get along with him pretty well. He stood at about 5'5" and was a little stubby, but I remember noticing that he had a really weird laugh, like a nervous type, and that whenever he laughed, he'd kind of look off to the side and then glance back at me from his peripheral vision. Yes, I knew it was weird even back then from the first time I met him. Literally the first 30 seconds of introducing myself, but I just thought that maybe he was just socially awkward or had bad teeth. Who knows? I was taught not to be judgmental, and he was otherwise pretty normal. We ended up hanging out fairly frequently, playing video games, drinking, smoking, but other people, especially in my dorm, didn't really seem to take a liking to him. Not that I really felt a strong bond with him. I didn't. It was a very superficial friendship built around drugs and debauchery. But I definitely got the sense that my other friends weren't very comfortable around him. Then something really weird happened that I've managed to successfully forget about until very recently. My heart is pumping out of my chest just typing this. One weekend, my roommate was home for a visit, and Nate's roommate was having his girlfriend over, which basically implied in college terms that Nate was going to be staying with me. It seemed automatic. We got trashed and smoked a ton, got pizza, and played video games. I was pretty out of it, and we were both sitting in desk chairs in my room, passing a bowl back and forth, when he then handed the bowl to me, leaning towards me in his chair, put his hand over my hand, and casually said in a very low and steady voice,
"I'm going to kill you."
Okay, so like I said, we were all sorts of messed up, but still, I was definitely a little freaked out. He'd never really been aggressive before. Even at his most intoxicated, he certainly never said anything like this before. I've never really been good at handling confrontation very well, so all I said was, "Dude, no, don't do that." And sort of laughed it off and tried to just write it off as a drunk stoned idiot playing too much Mortal Kombat. We had a bunk bed set up in the room since it was pretty small, and I was on the top. My roommate was a bigger guy and didn't want to have to climb down to pee in the middle of the night. We had both gone to bed, but my roommate had put up Christmas lights that were always kept on, strung along the ceiling. I should also add that I'm half deaf, so when I sleep, I tend to roll onto my functioning ear to block out sounds or muffle them in the pillow. This also means that I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. Sometime during the night, I woke up, feeling a little nauseous, and slowly opened my eyes. Nate was freaking standing on the edge of his mattress, holding onto the side railings of my top bunk and staring directly at my face as I was sleeping. I was totally creeped out. My eyes got wide as I snapped awake and sat up. "What the heck, dude? What's your problem?" I said, backing up and bumping my head on the wall behind me. Then he turned his head and gave me that freaking look from the corner of his eyes. The very same smile/laugh that freaked me out the first day I met him. He was still holding the railings and standing on the mattress from the lower bunk. His face was lit in weird splashes of color from the Christmas lights. He took one hand from the railing and put his finger to his mouth while smiling and still looking at me sideways, and then whispered, "Shh," before hopping down and leaving the room. Now, it was like 3 a.m. when this happened, and I didn't know where he went. I never told anyone about that, and pretty much did my best to bury it and never think about it ever again. I avoided Nate for the rest of the year, making up excuses whenever he wanted to chill alone, but ended up at the same parties with him a few times. We never talked about that, and he never brought it up. I transferred to another school the following year, not because of Nate, just financial reasons, and I did manage to forget about that weird incident. That was 15 years ago. I'm 33 years old now, and I recently got a call from my old roommate from the school in New Hampshire, who luckily remembered my very repetitive phone number. "Man, do you remember that guy Nate that you used to hang out with in the dorms? Well, about a year ago, he killed his 2 friends with a hunting knife while on a camping trip. He said he was too messed up to control himself. Apparently he was mixing his meds with booze and drugs, and they said he just lost it." The thing that really messes with me is wondering if he told them he was going to kill them, and if the last thing they saw was that freaking sideways smile that I saw when I woke up that night. I can't even imagine it. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And remember, if you have your own personal scary story that you'd like to send to me with me to narrate on my channel, be sure to submit it directly to my website at southerncannibal.com. And before we bring this video to a close, I just want to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beryl S., Beth A., Kate E., Katrina T., Celeste S., Ellie S., Emily W., Heather B., Howard R., Joseph F., Lori J., Matthew B., Michael G., Steph L., Tammy S., Terry H., Too Etchy for You, and Victor F. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/Southern Cannibal. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always stay